Passion, energy, and intelligence to take action on sustainable projects.
Oh, I think they're doing a great job. A lot of them are.
Good afternoon, Dwayne. How are you?
Not too bad, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Radio Cayman's Talk Today with Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
But I do have some questions.
There are more questions than answers.
Radio Cayman's Talk Today. If you're ready to talk, we're willing to listen.
Well, I really enjoy this program today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
May God bless every person.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on another terrific Tuesday that's full with promise and potential. And what awaits? A savory flavor cassava cake. Perhaps this is a little bit of dark chocolate. Maybe just company and conversation. Well, let's get through today and see where it takes us. Honor to always welcome Mr. Charlie Kirkconnell as we talk about CEC. We've got some more in store for you as we invite you to be a part of Talk Today.
Talk Today is brought to you by Subway, open 24 hours in Countryside, Anderson Square in Georgetown, and Centennial Towers in West Bay. And by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your sister islands. And Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village, convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays. And Royal Fidelity Bank and Trust, money at work.
Radio Cayman's Talk Today, the Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program. We ask our listeners to avoid statements or comments which are abusive, derogatory, malicious, or defamatory. Do not use any indecent language or make any statement which is false or misleading. Email talktoday@candw.ky or call 1-800-534-8255. Courtesy of Flow,
Cayman's #1 network that connects you to your world like never before.
Let your voice be heard. Once again, here's your host, Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And if I may add out to it, say thanks to all the good guys behind the scene, including DJ Lynn. When it sounds better, it's because they are just that much more diligent. So, DJ Lynn, as they said, you may not be handsome, but boy, you can be helpful. So, thanks very much, man. With that, we may not hear more today. Laughter, they say, is good for the body. Releases the good endorphins and well, Mr. Charlie Kirkconnell, if you don't mind me sharing publicly, very proud of you. Glad that you guys have the wherewithal, the staying power and the stick-to-itness, as Malcolm Gladwell talks about, to not just succeed, not just make it sustainable, but to make it that thing that is going to be a success because we are prepared to make the commitment. So to you and your good team over at the Cayman Enterprise City, hey, what? Success awaits, my friend.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. When we look at the evolving landscape, whether it's the political, the social, or the economic, it's about the people. We are the bits and pieces in the machinery that make the money, but we also make it matter. So as we look at the evolving sort of idea that the financial markets and the and the changing parks within the CEC, we can move. Help us to get an appreciation of not just the FinTalks and but CEC, as we invite you to share with us, Charlie.
Okay. Well, Cayman Enterprise City is a special economic zone designed to attract knowledge and technology-focused businesses to set up a genuine physical presence here. And what that means is to open an office and employ people locally. The park that we're here to talk to you about today and the FinTalks and how that relates to it is the Cayman Commodities and Derivatives Park, which is designed to attract businesses that are involved in the physical or electronic trade of commodities and or the electronic trade of derivatives products.
All right, so you could have joined us. Sometimes when we hear things like derivatives and even virtual assets, simple words like liquidity. Are you talking about water? No, I'm talking about my money. I want it right then and there. We unless we've been trained and exposed and are comfortable with those words in that environment, you may as well be talking to a scientist or a physician. They're trying to give you some prognosis, and you go, "Hold on, can you say that in English again?" But for those who are, it's easy. So, welcome us, Mr. Mike Philbrick, the Chief Executive Officer over at Resolve Asset Management, and these FinTalks, the Resolve Asset Management FinTalks. Maybe help us to appreciate. Well, good afternoon and welcome, and thanks for sharing with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And I think what you point out is incredibly important. The fact that there's complicated words and feedback mechanisms that everyone has to be involved with as they think about their investing future. So that's a big challenge. And we partner with and have the great fortune to have lots of friendships and colleagues like Corey Hofstein at Newfound who do an exceptional job of both highlighting the complexities and the nuance, but also making those topics so approachable so that they can be understood, so that investors of all kinds, whether they be advisors, allocators, or high net worth individuals, can grasp those concepts and understand the implications more broadly for their portfolio or their savings.
And even though it's not just jargon, I mean, irrespective of the industry, there's tech speak, there's that industry speak, and the jargon is easier for those people to speak amongst themselves. Mixing that, now we have all the acronyms and the alphabet soup aside, it makes it. But Corey, investing and investment choices from that individual investor who may have come by an inheritance, who may have, I don't necessarily subscribe to it, but may have had a windfall at the jackpot table of the lottery. Easy come, easy go.
Well, financial education is an uphill climb.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, just candidly, it's very boring, very dry. I love it, but that's not true for everyone. And so I think part of what we have to do as a financial community is not only recognize we have all this internal jargon, this alphabet soup that makes it really hard for outsiders to take part in, but we just have to make it more entertaining. And I know folks like Mike here have worked so hard through his career to make finance easier to digest for folks, a little bit more fun. It's not the high finance. It's let's all recognize this is an important part of our lives. Let's have a little fun and entertainment. Let's get more people involved.
What is it we're told, a little honey makes the medicine go down. And if you can think back to the days of our initial instruction, I love economics. I enjoyed finance. Accounting was nice, but it was dry, monotonous, boring, unless you got into the analysis. Okay, now I've had a trial balance. I got to the balance sheet. I understand where this is, the profit and loss statement. But what does it mean? Not just historically, but what are the projections going forward? Is it part of the investment strategy, the education, the financial literacy, getting people to appreciate that it's science, but it's also an art? From that perspective, Mike, how do we introduce, and to what extent is the audience that you're targeting for these fin talks that high finance guy who knows, or that a young college grad who she's just thinking, what are my career path? What are my savings for the yacht that I'm going to buy to take my dad? Is she listening? Where are we targeting, man?
Well, I think in this case, FinTalks is a nice culmination of really kind of targeting the whole spectrum. So you have people that are coming in, that are learning about investments initially, all the way to savvy allocators. And I can tell you with Liquidity Cascades that we're talking about tonight, which is a paper that Corey penned, quite insightful, crystallizes a lot of the zeitgeist around a particular topic, which is quite unique and different. The topic in and of itself, the way Corey expresses it, is quite easily understandable when it's broken down. It's the not knowing that would be, I think, the gap. Yeah. And so it doesn't really matter where you are on that spectrum. If you're just a beginner looking at passive investments in ETFs of market cap weighted exposures, let's say the U.S. S&P 500, the largest 500 companies in the United States, there's a lot of implications for that trend that are starting feedback loops into the world of finance, combined with coordinated central bank easing. So what the governments of the world are trying to do to ease the burden of the pandemic on the global economy.
Easing that you see from Federal Reserve. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And that's being done not just by that central bank, but coordinated across several central banks. And all of these items have implications for the feedback loops that are created in assets. And that's what Corey's paper highlights, and does it in a very approachable way. So I think the spectrum's quite wide. What you might do with those learnings will be very different depending on where you are in the spectrum, how much money you have. If you're starting early and you're saving, well, you need to worry about your human capital and exploiting that for the maximum amount of revenue over your lifetime. If you're a little bit later and you've got a large pool of assets and your human capital is sort of somewhat consumed, now you have to start thinking about, well, how do I manage risk in my large pool of capital, given this maybe new or unique view that Corey points out in the Liquidity Cascades paper. And I mean, last month we talked about the challenges with the ubiquitous 60-40 and such low interest rates, which force people to reach for yield. It forces them to do things that they may not want to do, which actually Corey highlights in the paper as well, bringing it back full circle. That actually has some implications as well. So I think it's an extremely insightful paper. I think the events conversation is going to be great. It's extremely eye-opening, and I don't think that most people have internalized how all these factors line up.
The interconnectedness of all this. I mean, some of us may listen to the financial report only because there's a particular stock that we're interested in, without understanding how it's all playing, the quantitative easing. Just that term alone, to many, well, what are they talking about? Maybe we don't do sufficient, good enough a job at educating people that we're not just talking to the people who are doing this. We need to be talking to the people who we need to bring into it. So with that money for the financial planning, I want, though, as we come out from the break, Corey, maybe to ask you about the paper. Share with it as much as you're comfortable. Give the audience a little teaser, and we can talk more, Charlie, about tonight and equally future Fin Talks, and maybe revisit the idea of interest rates. We see the all-time low, maybe expand a little bit more on the 60-40 and get people to appreciate you may have 10,000 or you may have 10 million. What you do with it, too much is given, much is required. What are you going to do with your talents? You're going to bury it, or you're going to invest it? And when you invest it, are you going to give it to Corey, or are you going to just give it to me, put under my pillow? Which one will give you more return, right? All right, we're going to pause and take a break. And this is why I enjoy these opportunities to highlight what happens at CEC and what I recognize with the dream, the vision, the tenacity, the drive, the determination, you can have great success for the individual, but it can play out well for the economy. All right, stay tuned for Talk Today.
So why is a computer so smart? Because it has a motherboard. Mother's Day is coming up. Do the smart thing. Stop by Savannah Pharmacy with a beautiful collection of bags and beauty products or housewares for outdoor dining. Make the smart decision. Get all your Mother's Day purchases at Savannah Pharmacy in Countryside Shopping Village or call 946-3336. Mom would be proud.
We are in an age of exponential change. The world is experiencing a technology boom where innovation is at an all-time high. What does this mean for small island nations? How can we adapt to the emerging digital revolution? Join 900 delegates from 3 Caribbean countries at one regional event to tackle the theme, Global Digital Disruption, Threat or Opportunity. The virtual RF Economic Outlook Conference happens on May 6th. Register today at rfeoc.com.
That thing we've been saying for 64 years, ignore it. Eat the KFC wings, drink the KFC gravy, fill up on fries. Just please forget the thing we normally suggest. You know, that thing you used to do with your tongue after finishing a delicious piece of our KFC chicken. We get it. It's not easy. There's a reason why it's been our slogan for over half a century. But the world's drastically changed of late, and as soon as we can embrace the change, the sooner we can all get back to doing what we do best. KFC. It's good.
The Lions Club of Grand Cayman, in partnership with the Lions Club of Cayman Brac, will be hosting a prostate and colon cancer educational awareness meeting this Friday, 30th April at 7 p.m. at the Brac Reef Resort Meeting Room. The guest speaker for the evening will be Dr. Gurish of the Faith Hospital. Royal Medical and Wellness Center will also be present to offer PSA testing. Come out and be informed.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waging to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome back, and thanks for joining us. And sometimes I get carried away, he's like, this guy's a foodie, is he a nerd? No, but he enjoys life. And I think getting to learn from people who are so gracious with their time and they're willing to share their knowledge and expertise and experience, then you can learn. Mr. Charlie Kirkconnell at Cayman Enterprise today as the CEO. your job, can I say, man, must be most rewarding to be able to be engaged and so engaging. So thanks very much, man.
Oh, thanks.
As
Rewarding and challenging.
Rewarding, well, they said nothing venture, nothing gain, but nothing good comes easy. I keep working on it. That's just kidding. As you get back to our discussion, maybe, revisit the notion of the FinTalks in CEC and some of the things coming up. Maybe you want to give us a quick preview?
Sure. Well, I'll talk a little bit about where the idea came from and why it exists. So, some of you may be familiar with our very successful Tech Talk series, which is, of course, focused on issues that are directly relevant to the technology industry. Not from the enthusiast point of view, but from the kind of the industry insider point of view. And we got thinking about, based on that success, what other things might we be able to do? And we thought that given the success of our, commodities and derivatives city, that we should see about doing something that is, focused on that, something for the people that are, setting up the businesses and operating, that they're, from Cayman in that industry. So we called up Mike, and he met us for coffee. This was me and Caitlin, and we talked it through. And the idea was to put together a series of talks called FinTalks that would be focused on, industry relevant topics and take something of a deep dive into the issues. And we thought that that there are a lot of events out there. But we didn't think that, or we weren't aware of, events that were designed not from a kind of a promotional point of view, or like a one-off conference on an annual basis that becomes quite a big event, but something that could be done regularly to keep the people in the industry engaged on an ongoing basis. And take that deep dive into the issues that are directly relevant to them.
Okay.
The other part of it, of course, is to get the people in the industry involved. So not just to create events for them to attend, but to create events that that they will speak at, that they will participate in a panel on, and that hopefully they will come forward with an idea for a particular event.
For future discussions.
Yes, future discussions.
But I think all of that too is the networking that takes place, the knowledge transfer amongst professionals, and the opportunity at the end to serve their clientele. So join us, as Charlie referenced, Mike Philbrick, the Chief Executive Officer of Resolve Asset Management, and his colleague Corey Hofstein, was the Chief Investment Officer, I'm told, Newfound Research. Tonight, virtual, liquidity cascades, thinking about, virtual assets. Virtual reality.
No, not virtual assets tonight.
Okay, no. But I was just as you were saying, liquidity cascades and words like virtual assets. The idea of virtual, not virtual anything, but just the notion of liquidity cascades. If you would, Corey, give us a perspective of your presentation there. Let's sneak preview into what those in attendance might come to expect.
I think the presentation really centers around this question that I received for years and years and years from my folks who allocated with me, which basically said, why are markets so weird right now? And I use that word weird very imprecisely.
Not volatile, but weird.
Weird. It just seems like they're behaving in an abnormal fashion.
Quirky almost.
Quirky, absolutely. And I think March 2020 last year was sort of the cherry on top, where people said, we have this massive global pandemic, and at the outset, markets don't respond at all. And then they have the most violent sell-off in market history. And then they rebound to all-time highs within 9 months. And folks who had stayed invested were now wealthier than they've ever been, despite the massive economic hardships being faced by what I would call the non-investor class. Folks everyone else. This is weird.
Yeah.
So why is it happening? Why are markets moving further, faster? Why are people less comfortable investing than they have been before? And so what I did ultimately after March 2020 is I took a survey, sort of went out to the world and started asking questions, because I don't certainly have all the answers. I just said, what do people believe are the causes of this? And some of the answers were, it's central bank intervention. They've moved from referee to player. Nope, it's the growth of passive investing. Active investors are now overwhelmed by the growth of Vanguard and people using the markets as a savings vehicle. And then other people were saying, nope, it's these high-frequency traders. They've changed the way markets operate. Markets are just more slippery than they've ever been, and they can move further faster. And the ultimate sort of take that I walked away with was none of these are the right answer. But probably in combination, they're the right answer. That they all have these feedback loops into each other. And so it's not an obvious one and done, you solve this problem and the whole market structure is fixed. All these things interact in a very complicated manner. And so that's what the talk tonight is about. And hopefully, at the very least, with a cocktail in hand, it's entertaining.
Right. As you said that, certainly, not with your intellect and certainly not with your tenacity to do the research, but I've just watched it casually. I came up with two possible scenarios. In economics, we talk about self-fulfilling prophecy. So human nature, the initial sell-off, spurned by people's propensity for risk. And you know what, let me get out now, cut my losses. So it speaks to human nature. What are we going to do? But secondly, investment is for the long term. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not for a quick, buy in and sell and get out like you would in maybe, FX and the like. Is that part of it? And at the end of the day, as much science, it comes down to the individual. How and then that collective individuals impact when we network.
I think that's absolutely part of it. But I think the missing piece is that risk management component that's being forced upon people. That certain players in the market have these fixed risk limits, or people who buy structured products in Europe and Asia that are being managed by banks that once they hit a certain level are forced to sell off.
Okay.
And so you get these sort of cascading triggers that happen in the market that I might not want to sell off, but my risk manager may say, hey, we have to cut positions because we're on margin and we have to maintain certain margin control. And I sell, and all of a sudden that forces the market to go down further, and it cascades into Mike's fund.
Right.
And Mike's risk manager taps him on the shoulder.
Back self-fulfilling prophecy. You see it, you respond to it, and then these arbitrary limits that we put in because we have decided that maybe, and guide me if this is not a good example, but the bank who say we're not going to have a particular exposure to one client beyond X percent. Arbitrary number that we were assigned based on something not scientific, maybe it's a gut. Sorry, we can't lend to you anymore because you're overexposed. Not unlike the same thing.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is, except all of a sudden when markets start to go down and the amount of capital that people have at the bank starts to disappear, all of a sudden the bank gets more and more nervous.
Well, an example of that, even on the reciprocating side of that, is let's take GameStop as an example.
GameStop,
And walking through the implications of one small stock where a swarm of retail investors decides that that is going to be the shilling point for the moment, and we are going to invade that space of the evil hedge funds. and then there's things that cascade down the track from that as someone sitting on a short position of GameStop has that marked up dramatically in their portfolio. Their margins get called in. But then there are banks that have exposures to multiple hedge funds or that have that exposure where they're seeing that exposure grow exponentially because of the options and the derivatives plays that are involved in that as well. And then all of a sudden you get these cascading events where I'm short and I now have to cover. So I am now the buying fuel that positively influences this cycle on the way up until the last dollar goes in. And I think another sort of recent example has been the recent hedge fund blow up, which I think maybe you're better at highlighting than myself.
The Archegos outfit? Yeah. So really a family office that started with about building a capital position of around $5 billion. I think it was, I don't remember where in Asia they were located. I think it was Singapore. And started trading with these banks and using derivatives to gain leverage. So every dollar they're putting in, they're getting $2, $3, $5, $10 of exposure.
Yeah.
And they're going long Chinese technology companies and U.S. media companies. And they become such a strong buyer that they actually start driving the price of these stocks up. And they don't take their profit off the table. They start doubling down with their profit. And then what happens is Viacom, one company says, wow, our stock price has run up. We're going to issue some equity. And all of a sudden that sends the price down. And this family office gets a margin call. And they start having to unwind their position. But they were the only buyer on the whole way up. There's no one there to sell to. And they end up self-imploding.
Yep.
And you get this very weird unwind where all of a sudden these banks are selling all these positions and they're slashing down 20, 30% overnight. But on the other side of that, this family office was actually hedging their position by being short the market. So now everyone's buying back the market, and you see the market going up as all these stocks are going down. And you get this very weird behavior saying, this isn't fundamental.
No.
This isn't tied to economics. This is just someone blew up.
Human behavior, trying to, not unlike the blackjack table. Right?
Well, the difference in the blackjack table versus these types of liquidity cascades that Corey highlights is the positive impact they have to continue in the direction that causes the pain, and the pain is not linear. If I bet the same on a blackjack hand all the time, I'm playing the $5 table. I mean, I can double down, I can do some stuff, but it's fairly limited. And there's reasons why there's a max bet at a blackjack table. If you've read Burning Down the House, where the MIT students go into Vegas, and that's a great book.
It's
Terrible
awesome
movie, but great book.
What was okay.
Yeah, but part of the reason there's a max at the blackjack table is when the table gets hot, i.e. the 5s and 6s are gone, you want to max your bets out. And that's sort of the non-linear aspect, but they put a cap on that. In the markets,
there's no cap.
There's no cap.
Your pockets are as deep as your pockets.
On top of that, I'll say, look, I'm not a great blackjack player. I just never have been. I know the rules and I don't like to play by them. Me misbehaving doesn't necessarily ruin the table for Mike. He might get a little mad at me, right? But great that's point. Not true where if Mike also happened to be trafficking in the same stocks that I'm irresponsibly long and I blow up, it can cause issues for Mike as those stocks are sold down. He might then be forced to sell. And so there's a very interesting dynamic in markets where there's this knock-on. Interconnectedness, absolutely.
And this is, I mean, Charlie, this is why this stuff is fascinating to me. But as we're talking, and you're talking margins, call. We didn't say put, right? We didn't use that word yet, but long and short. People listening would be, what are they talking about, right? And even those of us who may have one little inkling can quickly get lost. Financial literacy and education and these talks can invite us to a table where we may feel more comfortable making that investment. But then
and they also may not understand what's happening in their. I'm a simple long investor. Why is my stock, my Viacom stock, pretty conservative stock, it went up a lot. Boy, I'm such a genius, and now it's going down. What's happening to me? Why is this? And this is the point of one person's actions or one group of investors' actions all of a sudden have impact on your portfolio, and then you have the opportunity to make mistakes.
Cost and consequence.
Right. If you're not thinking about, well, why is this implication coming? The interconnectedness of the market is something else that Corey covers very well. And that is something that is getting, as we said, weird.
If I made an ask, and only if you think it's, opportune time and appropriate, we look at fiscal and monetary policies that are exercised by central banks. We look at the Cayman context where we have none in that sense. Yet we're impacted by, we use the structures that are here in order to play the markets, and they're impacted by that. So to what extent that human behavior, the U.S. Central Bank, for instance, through its Fed, sits and makes a decision as a private entity or a bunch of very knowledgeable people deciding this is what we should be doing relative to, quantitative easing, for instance, how much money they're going to print, to the European Central Bank, to maybe the impact in South America. Is there a coordinated attempt to bring it about, or is it the big guy in the room who has the economic and political power dictating you get on board, or we'll somehow sanction you?
Do you want to give the political answer?
No, we want an honest answer. Anybody say Venezuela?
I think we can't know, so we'll speculate a little bit on it.
Okay.
So, I don't think there's a man or woman in a room that is orchestrating all this, but there are several men and women across several large currency buckets that have a lot of power and influence.
Okay.
The U.S. dollar is the sort of default currency of the world, so they command a lot of power in this realm, and they provide a lot of security to the world. And you have the European Economic Unit, you have the Japanese unit, and you have sort of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1972, we just basically went off the gold standard, and we started the fiat experiment, where money no longer is tied to some sort of hard asset that has some sort of limitation to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the experiment we find ourselves in, and we've driven interest rates down to the zero bound. At the same time, printing 25% more money than has ever been printed in all time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that printing of those monies is going to go towards asset prices, because asset owners have more money, and they see central banks of the world on a coordinated basis printing more money, i.e. bringing the denominator down for everybody. So your everything else is worth more in terms of fiat money.
Mm-hmm.
And just as Corey pointed out earlier, what's happened is you have this bifurcation. Those who are investors and have savings have benefited tremendously and have incomes that have been sustainable, and then their consumption has been restrained. Their savings rates are higher. And then you have the other part of the population where that's not the case. They don't have investments. They haven't had an uptick in their savings, and they've actually lost a lot of their jobs. And this creates some social tensions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's at a grand scale. And the reason that these central banks are trying to coordinate this is that if we all do it, you can't run and hide anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? You can leave the U.S. dollar to go where? To the euro, to the yen? And so it's coordinated for a reason. And if someone has a particularly strong currency because they want to be fiscally responsible, they are disadvantaged for that from a global trade perspective.
All right. When you come back from the break, maybe we can invite you to consider inflation. Where is this going and what may happen? And probably we can come back to the Cayman context that we've seen seemingly it's a consideration to parking money in real estate here. Buying sight unseen, what does that do? Potentially the social implications, interconnectedness, huh? I tell you, boy, it's a word of the day. All right, we're going to pause and take a short break, but when we come back, if you want to be like me and live and learn, if you want to be like me and laugh and love, hey, this is the place to be. Stay tuned for Talk Today.
Busy, busy, busy. Feel like there's not just enough hours in the day. Savannah Pharmacy, service to make your life easier. Now you can WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. And pickup is just around the corner with everything your family needs and convenient opening hours including Sundays and holidays. WhatsApp your prescription order to 929-5045. Savannah Pharmacy, wholesome values with modern conveniences.
Freedom, Cayman Brac. Freedom, Little Cayman. Soft breezes, blue waters, no traffic. Unwind and rejuvenate your mind, body, and soul. Sister Island Staycations, a taste of freedom. Discover all that our sister islands have to offer.
At Subway, we know a meal isn't quite complete without a side, and that's why we're introducing waffle fries. Subway's waffle fries are oven-baked softness with extra crispy edge, giving a satisfying taste to be enjoyed as is or in any of Subway's dipping sauces. Order waffle fries as a side item for $2 or make it a meal deal with any sandwich or salad with a 20-ounce drink and waffle fries for an additional $3 or a 30-ounce or bottle drink and waffle fries for an additional $3.50. Subway, eat fresh.
Work Jobs Cayman has a new look. Registered users can now experience a more user-friendly platform, allowing for easier registration and posting of job ads. To see and experience the new look today, visit www.work.ky. That's WORC.ky.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome back. And thanks very much for listening and joining. And if you're sending me messages, I'm on the radio. No, just kidding. I'm enjoying myself. I'm very, very grateful that not only do I have a job to come to, but I have the health to do it. So thank God for that. And I'm also very grateful that I can say, hey, I know Charlie Kirkconnell. If they can call his sisters and they can keep him in check. But to you and your team over at Cayman Enterprise today, thanks very much. It's a lot of hard work. And tonight alone, the Fin Talk is going to transfer at 5 p.m.?
I believe the doors open at 5, and shortly thereafter, I'm not even sure what time they've given you to begin the talk.
I think it's 5:30.
5:30. So there's a little bit of a kind of a arrival and kind of social opening, and then there's a talk, and then there's an opportunity to network following the talk as well,
and ask questions, ask the hard questions,
and ask questions.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's what we learn, right? When we engage, the act of listening can be very taxing, but it is very rewarding if you honestly engage. Listen, ask a question, engage, and you may go away tired, but you can go away fulfilled if you have. And that's the art of conversation. I think lost these days because people don't understand the importance of human interaction. Thankfully, I'm rediscovering that. So, Mike, Corey, from the perspective of the interconnectedness, I always tell people there isn't one single independent nation. China probably comes the closest because of all that it is in terms of population, political, economic, military might. But if it doesn't have a market to sell to, if it doesn't have a market in which you can draw resources from, how long would it survive? I mean, just a thought. Maybe I'm just being a little bit too pensive on a Tuesday, but tomorrow's Wednesday.
I mean, China blocked itself in. China basically led the world for most of the millennia that human civilization has existed, blocked itself in internally for 100 years, and is not quite caught up yet from that sort of closing in of its economy. So integrating economies and taking advantage of free trade is a viable avenue, and when you have sort of the discomforts that are going on now, what you're seeing is deglobalization, people trying to put up walls, whether it's in the U.S. or Europe, looking at immigration, finance, where they're going to build industries, making sure you bring the semiconductor production back to the U.S. because they don't have a secure source of that. There's a lot of implications to all of this, and to talk about the impact of the financial largesse and the impact here in Cayman on real estate. Well, when you have all that excess capital around, capital is going to look to buy real hard assets that can't be depreciated away by the whims of a central bank.
Right. And inflation won't impact it in a negative way. Or will it?
Well, it can.
Okay.
It can. So real estate is a function of two things, the cost of building the entity and then the cost along the way. So where you have taxes, for example, in the U.S., there's pretty significant property taxes. And you get into certain cities and there's business taxes. So they can ratchet up the costs of maintaining the buildings and those types of things. Maybe not so much here in Cayman, and maybe why some of the money's coming here. You pay your one time and you're sort of done for now. If governments run into some short squeezes, how does that change down the road? It's hard to know.
Does taxes, in particular direct taxes like income and property taxes, capital gains taxes, and even in taxes on dividends, if it's okay to ask you if you're amenable to answering, are they indirectly lead to people being discouraged in terms of productivity? You've taken 40%, 30%, 20% of your hard-earned money in a tax. Is that a disincentive to effort and output and income? He gets a hard question.
I feel like I'm on the mic all the time.
Mike can't be on the mic all the time, Corey.
My answer would be it is incredibly nuanced, right? I think what we have seen historically is there's just probably not enough historical precedents to draw a single answer from that question. What I will say is what we can look to is something like what happened in the U.S. when buybacks from corporations suddenly became tax advantaged relative to paying and distributing dividends. Well, all of a sudden, buybacks became one of the primary ways for corporations to return capital to their shareholders, and that arguably has impacts on how markets function. So you're going to see people ultimately try to maximize their post-tax earnings.
Mm-hmm.
Most individuals don't always necessarily operate in that way, right? There is some preference that they have. But at the end of the day, I think economies as a whole tend to migrate towards the means by which they can maximize that post-tax profit.
It changes behavior for sure. If you look in Canada, your home that you live in appreciates tax-free. So it is a very prioritized asset for Canadians to make sure that they own the home that they live in, because any gains that accrue to that asset accrue tax-free, and it's the only true tax-free asset. So it drives people to that end, and if you're a government that wants that as part of the behavioral bias that you're going to impart to your people, then that's what you do.
But can I contrast that?
Yeah,
in the US,
I was going to ask you.
From the US perspective, it is tax-free if it's your primary residence up to a certain amount of money, unless you're married, in which case it doubles, and then you get twice the amount of tax-free gain, and then after which you are paying gains. You could argue that is a strange incentive in a way to get people to marry in the U.S., that you're saying you get tax benefits from being a couple.
Yep. And as we're listening to someone here measuring in, and then we're going to come back to that. Look at the capital gains, and I was told in a Canadian example that your asset, your home, can appreciate. I think in the U.S. at one point in time, rents and mortgage were tax deductible. No longer the case. But on the capital gains, you don't pay any sort of taxes. But if you were leaving it to your estate, then the inheritance tax is significant. Is that the case?
In Canada, it's quite small. They're called probate fees.
Okay.
But they're very small. But in the U.S., I'm not exactly sure. I think they're larger. But most folks who have large estates actually do some planning around that and circumvent those taxes, I think.
And this is where the Cayman context in markets like Cayman come into play, where we allow people to not evade taxes, but have some proper structured estate planning. Why work? At the end of the day, you leave nothing, for those to come after to continue investing that drives the economy, creates employment. Tonight's discussion, it may be on one thing, but it may lead to more people having a greater sense of financial literacy, becoming more comfortable with the terminology, understanding the importance of. They just don't park their money and not know what is transpiring. And when they ask a question, they have a network that they can draw on. Charlie, this is why your work is so crucial, because it's accessible. We don't need to travel to San Francisco, New York, or London, or Tokyo, or elsewhere. We can just go down the street. We can call up someone that knows someone if we don't know them directly. Kudos, my friend. Kudos. But as we look at it, wow, time has gone quickly. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I'm really very grateful. And maybe this could be future discussions as to where we are in terms of what we should be doing and why the Cayman economy is so important, despite the what my friend called it, the Organization for Economic Collapse and Disaster, the OECD. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
That's great. I got to use that one.
Organization for Economic Collapse and Disaster. It's not my original thing. He coined it, 20 years ago? I just love it, man. I think that's what it is. I won't tell you what the other one stands for, but but Charlie, as we wrap it up tonight and future discussions, what do you want our listeners to know?
Okay, so I'll try to squeeze in all the stuff that Bianca sent me here to say. These are we're here talking about our FinTalks series of finance industry focused events. They're monthly. And anybody who might be interested in attending an event should register their interest at innovate at caymanenterprisecity.com. And again, this is a series intended to be monthly, industry focused on things directly relevant to people in the finance industry.
All right. Well, this is where I think that knowledge. End of the day, we talk about knowledge-based industries and knowledge transfer, and at some point maybe I'll revisit, because as you were chatting, I remember the names of the Ivan Boskis and the Michael Milkins in the junk bond days. Maybe from an ill-informed perspective, but I can't help thinking that the markings are still there for today to be revisited. But just like Corey, he's like, this guy's been reading.
History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
He has a job in that talk show.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much. Props to you, Mike. Maybe any closing thoughts you may want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, only that if you are interested in the investments from an entertaining perspective. At Resolve, we run a couple of properties. We have a YouTube channel called Resolve Riffs, and we do some podcasts. And Corey has a couple of great properties.
Pirates of Finance?
Pirates of Finance, which is awesome. The entertainment quality there is through the roof. And obviously he's got lots of research on his website, and you can sign up. And
you may have liked Pirates of Penzance, but not like the Pirates of Penzance. Corey, it was a pleasure, man.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Looking forward, And Charlie?
May I add one thing?
Of course.
I did neglect to say that the sponsors of the FinTalk series are Resolve Asset Management, SEZC, and Cayman Enterprise City.
All right.
Oh, and if others want to participate, they should hit us up at that email, innovate at Cayman Enterprise City, with some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. The two sponsors that I mentioned, sponsors of the series, and then the individual events. It is open to anyone, to come forward with an idea for an individual event and be the sponsor of that event as well. So innovate at caymanenterprisecity.com to register your interest or to submit a proposal for discussion.
Well, thank you, man. I trust it'll continue to bear much fruit, and as we look at it, we're working hand in hand to make it better. Rising tide, my father reminds me, floats all ships. Let's be that ship that is not just a safe harbor. All right, gents, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Tonight will be a resounding success, and who knows, our paths may cross once again. All right, to our listeners, stay tuned and join us after the break. We got some more good stuff to share with you.
Continuing the Caymanian tradition.
Let Cora keep my ground so clean.
The heart and soul of the Cayman people. Thank you for keeping the culture alive.
Let's read the news every day. From East End to Georgetown, down into West Bay.
Radio Cayman in the Cayman Islands.
Today's biggest news.
Radio Cayman. Your voice, your choice.
Local, regional, international. This is Headlines from Radio Cayman's newsroom.
Today's biggest news.
From Radio Cayman's newsroom, I'm Shanda Gallego with your latest headlines. Government reported the results of 561 COVID-19 tests on Monday. 7 came back positive. They are travelers who tested positive during routine screening. So far, more than 65,000 vaccines have been administered locally. Turning to international news now. Crematoriums in the Indian capital Delhi have been forced to build makeshift funeral pyres as the city runs out of space to cremate its dead. Staff are working around the clock while parks and other empty spaces are also being utilized for cremations. Families have had to wait hours before being allowed to cremate their dead due to the rise in demand. Deaths have been surging in India as a second wave of infections devastates the country. The European Parliament is expected to ratify the post-Brexit EU-UK trade deal, a key move to ensure that tariff and quota-free trade continues. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement, TCA, has been operating provisionally since January. Brexit tensions remain, including a French threat of reprisals against the UK over new fishing restrictions. Northern Ireland trade is also a thorny issue. Princess Diana's wedding dress will go on public display at Kensington Palace after her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, agreed to loan the item. Diana wore the famous dress, which boasted a 25-foot train, the longest in royal history, at her 1981 wedding to Prince Charles. The public can view the item from June at the royal residence in West London, where Diana lived. Those are your latest headlines here on Radio Cayman. I'm Shanda Gallego.
For the latest in news and information,
follow Radio Cayman on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Download the Radio Cayman app or log on to our website, radiocayman.gov.ky.
The Lions Club of Grand Cayman, in partnership with the Lions Club, will be hosting a prostate and colon cancer educational awareness meeting this Friday, 30th April at 7 p.m. at the Brack Reef Resort Meeting Room. The guest speaker for the evening will be Dr. Gurish of the Faith Hospital. Royal Medical and Wellness Center will also be present to offer PSA testing. Come out and be informed.
Radio Cayman is pleased to feature this special Sister Islands historical vignette, brought to you by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your Sister Islands.
Captain Charles Leonard Kirkconnell, OBE 1922 to 2010. Captain Charles Kirkconnell has donated land on all 3 islands for projects close to his heart. In Cayman Brac, he donated the land on which now stand Faith Hospital, the dental clinic, and Kirkconnell Community Care Centre. The Booby Pond Reserve on Little Cayman began with his gift of a small strip of land along the pond, and in 2001 to 2002, he donated the land for a new church in Blossom Village. Bethel Baptist Church on Walkers Road, Georgetown, is built on land given to the church by Captain Charles and his brother. He represented the Sister Islands in the Legislative Assembly for almost 13 years, 8 of which he served on Executive Council, holding the portfolio of communications, works, and district administration. During his tenure, the road across the bluff was completed. The Aston Ruddy Civic Centre was built, the Cayman Brac Airport runway was lengthened to 6,000 feet, and a new terminal and fire station were built. New docks were built on both Sister Islands, and a new Port Authority building was undertaken. Captain Charles and his wife Carol Jean Nee McIntosh have 5 children. Captain Charles Leonard Kirkconnell.
Radio Cayman is pleased to feature this special Sister Islands historical vignette, brought to you by the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport. Explore your history, explore your land, explore your Sister Islands.
Wouldn't it have been grand if you had purchased land 30 years ago? It may not be 2020, but a perfect vision has never been more clear. Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, poised for growth with an eye on the future. Your land, your history, your future. Discover all that our sister islands have to offer.
We are in an age of exponential change. The world is experiencing a technology boom where innovation is at an all-time high. What does this mean for small island nations? How can we adapt to the emerging digital revolution? Join 900 delegates from 3 Caribbean countries at one regional event to tackle the theme, Global Digital Disruption, Threat or Opportunity. The virtual RF Economic Outlook Conference happens on May 6th. Register today at rfeoc.com.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome back, and thanks for joining us. And as always, for me, a distinct privilege and pleasure and an honor to be able to sit and facilitate and to learn, and I'm always grateful. Now, the chance to be positioned as a country, not just a territory, but a country of people with great intellect, insight, an aptitude and a willingness, such a resolve and a resilience to move forward, whether we see it in the aftermath of a hurricane, Ms. Nikki, or whether we see it in the things to come. So as we invite you to share with us and appreciate that our success financially isn't just because of the people that are here from all walks of life, but the collective commitment to making it that much better. So Ms. Nikki Callender, thanks for joining us. And as we welcome Ms. Camille Anderson to the discussion, we'll go to our phones and bring more along. The importance of having these conferences, especially in a time like this where from the political despot to the aspiring politician, to those who may see things and hear, as the politicians have said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, it doesn't have to be a financial or political crisis. It could just be a personal crisis. How do you benefit from it? How do you let it be positioned to improve and to empower?
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing about this annual conference. It's now in its 18th year, but the goal always of the RF Economic Outlook is to bring global perspective to our islands and really help us focus on what's happening geopolitically, economically, in terms of digital disruption in particular this year, and distill that information at a local level, which helps us guide how we set out our business plans for the year, how we conduct our lives, and how we really operate here.
And as we get ready to go to the phones, from that perspective, words like the geopolitical landscape, it sounds fancy.
Yeah.
If you've ever been in the recipient of information, that maybe it's a daily report that comes in, from the politicians or their advisors or the financial analysts who say, well, the markets are looking like this. It gives you a perspective, but it comes back to everything and anything has an interplay. So, Ms. Camilla, from that idea, these conferences, whether virtual or in person, can position us to meet new people, but to understand that the thinking and the ruminations of others could be impacting us as we're impacting them.
Definitely. And I think there's so many big themes at play that this conference is really bringing together under the idea of digital disruption, but we're looking at environment and energy, healthcare, digital currencies. There really are so many different threads to this, and I think that's what it really brings together and makes us think about the big picture a bit more.
Well, we certainly want a chance to understand more about the conference and highlight again, Nikki, the importance of it. But, through you, so with maybe a brief intro from you as we go to the phones, and I'll do my very best to say it's Mr. Ugram Aneo.
Yes,
right, who's an engineer, an inventor, the co-founder and CEO of Shift Power Solutions. I went online earlier looking at it and I thought, wow. So let's go to the phones and welcome when you come in. Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Aneo. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I just want to make sure you're able to hear us okay, and I want to welcome you to being a part of our discussion.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it truly is a pleasure. I'm always, I say this gratefully, and with such, gracious humility that I learn a lot, and I feel almost that Cayman is that much better place because we have this almost unfettered access. So before we invite you to our discussion, Ms. Nikki, would you want to set the stage, do a brief intro, or we just get Ms. Aneo to do so?
Yeah, well, we're really excited to have Ugram join us this year. She'll talk a little bit more about what she's going to be covering on the 6th of May. But really, it's so important for island nations to be thinking about the future of energy and renewable energy. And that's why we've invited Ugram to join us this year to give us her experience and her global perspective and help us bring that back to how we conduct here.
And certainly, I want to go back to you, Mr. Aneo, from that perspective, and not to belabor it or emphasize it, but I'm hoping that the mothers and the daughters who are listening in particular emphasize that you're an engineer. That's a field that isn't, the sole domain of men. We need the analytical, creative, intellectual minds of our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters to, sort of embrace it. So maybe at some point you can, as you close out, encourage the young ladies to consider the importance of science and technology and engineering and math, and that they too probably better equipped because their law is logical. If that would be okay with you, we may ask of you at some point to sort of emphasize that so that we have that educational appeal.
Absolutely.
Okay. But in listening to grid management and to looking at discussions in words like net metering, for instance, the simple, easy things, but the notion that we need to find new ways to have sustainable energy to meet that ever sort of almost insatiable demand as a people across the globe that we have to power our latest gadget and gizmo for clean energy to improve our environmental sort of quality. Can you take us on a path to potentially what those energy needs would be like in the future and what we can do today to talk about as we invite you to share with our discussion?
Yeah, so fortunately there's been amazing trends in the energy and technology sector, especially when it comes to distributed energy resources. Sorry, I apologize. Is there a delay or feedback?
Okay, let me just check with our handsome engineer. No, he's not a handsome. Okay, he's just said try again, please, and see if you're hearing it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, we're hearing you fine. Are you hearing something in your headset that is not comfortable?
This is much better.
Much better?
Thank you.
Okay, I was smiling now, so it's better.
Okay,
She's
good.
like, I don't think so.
All right, so when we talk about the future of energy, we're actually at this really exciting moment because innovation in solar and battery and inverter technology has meant that there is a clean and reliable alternative, and often over time a more affordable alternative to the more widespread use of petrol and diesel generators. So around the world, wherever you had either resiliency challenges or unreliable grids, you often would see generators, gensets being the answer to those, and not really being a scalable or affordable option at all times. And so first you see more thoughts about renewables, solar and batteries. But I think that the next layer, and what's really exciting about this conference, is thinking about the digital angle of all of this. And this is actually what Shift, my company, specializes in, is when you're able to not only look at these assets as an alternative energy resource, you can also look at them as what they can offer in aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, there's a bit of the feedback happening again here.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to continue.
Yeah, we're hearing you quite fine. In fact,
Okay.
very clearly. And technology, we're not leveraging it properly, but apologies for that. But we're hearing you absolutely as if you were sitting in the studio.
Wonderful. So what I'm really excited about sharing is a little bit more of the type of innovation that we're seeing both in business model and what technology and digital transformation is allowing new business models that can allow renewable and alternative energy resources like solar and batteries to scale and meet the needs of people even further. So you mentioned some of these things when we talk about net metering, and that's a little bit more about how do distributed resources like solar kind of complement existing infrastructure like the grid so that you'd be able to essentially sell back excess capacity into the grid. But I'm also seeing interesting models where people are looking more at peer-to-peer sharing of resources. And even in cases where you can't feed back into the grid, things about more strategic load shedding. So if the utility companies or the grid has the ability to better understand the capacity of assets that are available, capacity of solar and batteries that are available around a region or a market, how that can inform how they deliver their services and more reliably deliver power services, especially when you're dealing with resiliency or outages.
But as I listen to you, I'm immediately thinking that there are many who would say, well, whether we go back to way back when I was younger and we talk about natural monopolies, to now where we're seeing some entities because of the sort of power generation and then also the transmission and distribution, thinking of sort of power grids that are smaller markets. We can have, they would say, more than one power generation, more than one sort of transmission and distribution system. We may have alternative power generation facilities, as it were. How does that play out in the wider picture where you're thinking of, say, a small island nation versus a space like the US and Canada that could, part of that load shedding, part of that interconnectedness of using one state or one province, one country and the other, tying in their respective grids in order to share the power generation?
So what I'm seeing with some of our customers and in other markets is that you essentially have the broader grid, the utility company. This is what you're talking about, maybe a single entity that's dealing with transmission and distribution. But when it comes down, what we're seeing is actually smaller urban microgrids. So this is where a collection or group of homes can actually also cluster, or businesses cluster, to share their resources in aggregate. So a lot of it is about how can you aggregate and collectively leverage resources, even if it's not just an individual building or home and the grid, but thinking more about smaller plays. So for example, what we see is a new development, a real estate developer will come to us and say, I'm going to build an estate of about mixed use. There's going to be a couple businesses and maybe about 50 homes. And I want that to be a microgrid in and of itself with a single grid connection. And so then we can better manage how people can integrate solar, batteries, and leverage within that smaller microgrid. And so then you have energy service providers that are responsible for that smaller system. And then that service provider is also engaging the utility or the distribution company. So it basically creates additional levels of flexibility where it's not each home or building or office is its own distinct microgrid that now has to relate directly to the utility, but it's creating smaller clusters. That smaller clustering and distribution is what helps make it possible to implement newer models and schemes for how you better manage and integrate assets.
Right. So would that then come down to sort of not just the political will, but the willingness to adopt public policy that perhaps shifts away from the traditional model of that monopoly, not just having the sole sort of single source for the generation of the power, but also the transmission and distribution. We probably have done the former much easier with the microgrids, the use of solar panels on the personal homes or the large-scale commercial projects. But then it still comes into the T&D being tied into those microgrids as you shared it. Is it public policy and political will, or is it more of a societal demand that would drive that?
the interesting thing is it can really, this is probably not the comforting answer, but the truth is it could really go both ways. I've seen markets where policy is following innovation. So you had companies come in and start implementing new concepts, and then it's policy and regulatory frameworks that are having to catch up with that innovation and curate around that. So in that sense, you have people being able to say, well, we're going to build our own development, we're going to provide services to ourselves, and we're going to abide by having a single connection to the utility, but within our compound or within our microgrid or an estate, we're going to operate at our own will. And then what ends up happening is you have policy that's coming thereafter to basically address or handle these newer models. Right. On the other side, we do see markets where, like we're seeing markets even like Kenya and East Africa, where there is policy that's really kind of driving and favoring how renewables can integrate with the grid and create policy that better supports this. I think a lot of it comes down to what the current state is of energy infrastructure and what you're having to work against or build up.
If I may perhaps ask, and I certainly don't want to overly impose on you, but your intellect and certainly your industriousness and willingness to share just makes me that much more inclined to engage. But may I ask maybe two other things and be guided by whatever you respond and wish to choose to further share with us. One, is it then easier in that developing, advancing economy whose infrastructure isn't as robust to now implement these new strategies and technologies and develop its infrastructure to meet that growing need, as opposed to the more advanced economy? Let's take a Cayman example where we already have an established, well-established infrastructure. How do you switch it out? Is one easier than the other? And if the former is easier, can the more developed one somehow transition and pivot to embrace these newer technologies and this advancing sort of use of alternative energy and solar, for instance?
Yep. Well, there are essentially two factors that are at play. And even with my example, actually, with Kenya, I'm referring to more urban areas where the infrastructure is a bit more developed than more rural areas. But really, the two factors that you would see at play is size of market. It's a lot easier to operate in smaller markets, fewer stakeholders at play, easier to kind of model things a little bit than when you're dealing with massive markets, lots of legacy infrastructure, so many stakeholders. It's just a lot more challenging. You have to work up against a lot. There's probably a lot of policy also and regulation that you have to navigate around when you have large, more established markets. I do think there's a benefit, though, to operating in markets where infrastructure may not be as reliable. And really that's coming down to business and how companies and innovation scales, which is there's a larger pain point. So people's willingness to pay, people's willingness to come to the table is more favorable when they're having to deal with more challenges than when the problem and the pain point is not nearly as severe. So there's a balance there. Like in some of the markets we operate in, when people are struggling to deal with diesel generators because the grid is so unreliable and problematic, they have a stronger willingness to adopt new models, to integrate solar, to integrate storage, than in markets where it's of interest, but the alternative, the existing infrastructure or grid, may not be nearly as problematic or frustrating on a day-to-day, and therefore it creates different dynamics.
Then as a supplementary, does it become that much more difficult than if that particular sort of utility is a publicly traded company and people now have, as part of their estate, they invested heavily in the shares and the like, that potentially as it transitions, their role, their profitability may not align with historical models, and so there may be a pushback as we move to a different landscape, considering the environmental factors of alternative energy. Is that a challenge that we have to navigate as well?
It is a challenge you have to navigate. But what I think that there are models that can be favorable and can align incentives correctly. I think that's where the real work comes into play. You have to bring together the subject matter and technology experts, but also people who understand stakeholders in the market quite well and bring them to the table together, because it is about aligning incentives. Even in the markets where you have, let's say, widespread dependence on diesel generators, and it's not even a public utility, you have their stakeholder, their lobby, their foothold in the market that you have to either work with or work against. And so, I think it's a lot about bringing the right people to the table. That's one reason I'm excited about this conference, because I do think that there's going to be a lot of important stakeholders bringing forth their own expertise.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time and share with us, and I'll ask Ms. Nikki in a bit to maybe expand a little bit further on the conference. But thank you, for being a participant. Thank you for joining us, even though it was remotely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Great speaking with you.
It was my honor and pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a wonderful conference, all right? Now, from that perspective, though, Ms. Nikki, as we transition in a second to bring Dr. Kraft into the conversation, this is why these conferences are important. It's not just for those who were in attendance when we were doing it, but even virtually.
Yeah.
Our students, but the wider community globally.
That's right. And actually, we cover such a diverse range of subjects and influences across the day every year. But this year, as you say, on a virtual platform, it's really relevant for everybody from every sector. And this year, we're really excited to bring on board 100 students from each region. So the conference is taking place virtually in Cayman, Barbados, and in Bahamas. There'll be 100 students from each market who'll be able to share and hear from these experts on these subjects. All
right. Well, Ms. Camilla will bring you back as a sponsor into the discussion. But first, let's go back to the phones and welcome Dr. Kraft in a second as we bring up Dr. Daniel Kraft. Now, as we get ready to introduce him to the conversation, Nikki, would you want to do a brief intro of Dr.
Yes.
Kraft?
So Dan Kraft is our healthcare expert. He's going to be, I'll share with you, but he's going to be telling us a little bit more about the advancements and evolution in healthcare, what that means both from an investment perspective and also what that means from, perspective as a patient and a user of these services.
All right, perfect. Well, Dr. Kraft, good afternoon. Are you there, sir?
I am here. Greetings from Silicon Valley.
All right.
Well,
now we okay, hold on. We have a slight feedback. I don't know. I don't mind hearing my voice, but not like that. So are you, Dr. Kraft, are you able to hear us clearly? Is it anything on your set?
Anything on your set? You're very clear, loud and clear.
Okay, now I'm hearing what Ms. Anea was hearing just then. I'm not now. Okay, thank you for joining us and from Silicon Valley. Well, here we are from the wonderful studios of Radio Cayman and Grand Cayman. Thanks for being a part of our discussion, and good afternoon again.
Good afternoon. It's still morning here, but no matter where you are in the world, it's an exciting time for thinking about the future of health and medicine. It's really, COVID has been a horrible pandemic, but some of the bright sides are that it's helping, accelerate new ways of doing everything from public health to diagnostics to therapy, and that will certainly apply to the Caymans as well.
Well, we recognize how sometimes, that old adage our parents would remind us of, necessity is the mother of invention. What we can do when we're forced to do it, when we have to do it in short order without going to a committee. Your presentation at the conference, I'm excited to have had the opportunity to read some of the things that Ms. Nikki shared with us in relation to some of your academic research and its focus on stem cell, but maybe just a brief sort of overview of your participation in your presentation.
Sure. So, my background as a traditional physician scientist, trained at Stanford and Harvard, and certainly been involved in the stem cell world. But more recently, I've been the chair of medicine at Singularity University and run a program called Exponential Medicine. And that's all focused on how do we pull collaborators from around different technologies, from AI, robotics, 3D printing, nanotech, genomics, blockchain, video games, all together. And what I'll be speaking about is really how do you, number one, take a look at the pace of change through these technologies that are advancing, what we can do on our magical smartphones, to the Internet of Medical Things, to low-cost genomics. How do we start to leverage those tools that exist today and the ones that are coming to do a better job of three things? Number one, health and wellness. How do we stay healthy rather than wait for disease to happen? That might be using your Fitbit or your connected home or your genome or your chatbot. So this new era of collecting data, even from your voice or from your camera. How do we sort of connect the dots in that data, not just to make it data, but useful information for you as a human or as a patient or for your doctor? We'll cover a little bit about what's happening in diagnostics, new ways to pick up diseases early, particularly relevant in the time of COVID. And there's now an explosion of new ways of doing tests that can be run from your smartphone or using diagnostics from your voice, or a mobile ultrasound device that connects to your iTablet, all the way to where we're going with therapy, which in the time of COVID has accelerated our ability to do virtual visits and have them paid for. And those are going to go well beyond just talking to your doctor or nurse on the phone, but leveraging your base underlying health information, maybe from your smartwatch, how you were sleeping the night before, your genomics to pick your pharmacogenomics to pick the right drug. And finally, how do we pull these technologies together to get us all contributing to the future of healthcare, like a Google Maps or Waze, where we're sharing our data in smart private ways, but we can build better healthcare maps, whether in the Caymans or New York City or Rwanda, so that we're all learning and accelerating solutions for health and medicine.
Well, as I listen to you, I'm recognizing immediately the interplay with so many things, not the least of which data protection and the idea of making sure our privacy, or as my British friend says, privacy, the idea that we're not just want to protect that, but we have to ensure that we're increasingly comfortable with the technology. The physician visit no longer is in the office, it's virtually. One is in Cayman, the other is not in Cayman, for instance. And then more importantly, you talk about Internet of Things and how the practice of medicine, for instance, may no longer just evolve with what we expect it to have been. It's everything. So Dr. Graf, from that perspective, then, could we then maybe ask of some of the research from stem cell immunotherapies to the idea that as we look at some of maybe stem cell harvesting, the notion that from cancer to other issues that have been plaguing humanity for centuries, are we closer?
Yeah, well, we're kind of closer to going from our traditional model, which is not really healthcare, but sick care, very much based on intermittent data that you collect only when you go to the doctor or end up in the emergency room. That leads to our reactive model, where you wait for the heart attack, the stroke, the cancer, and moving to this era of proactive, preventative, real healthcare. And part of that can be this area of regenerative medicine, often around stem cells, so that if you have an organ that might be damaged from disease or aging or trauma, that we have an ability to sort of regenerate it. Or replace it, from 3D printing a kidney, which several companies are working on, to a patch for your heart or for after a stroke. And so there's a lot of interesting elements in the stem cell world, which is really, I'm a bone marrow transplant doctor by background. That's a form of stem cell therapy we've been doing for 50 years to mostly treat cancers. But we're moving into the space where we're starting to take your own, let's say, a blood stem cell or blood cell and turn it into a pluripotent stem cell, and in the test tube essentially turn that into almost any tissue type, and start to use those in true therapeutic approaches to treat heart attacks, strokes, liver disease, or to help keep and turn on sort of the stem cell activity of your normal organs so they can continually regenerate. Maybe we can start to reverse aging as well, tied to stem cells and the aging clocks, which we're learning more about. So it's an exciting time to think again proactively and even about stopping and reversing aging before it occurs.
But as I listen to you, I'm realizing that there's a feedback. But the notion that, again, public policy and in particular health insurance will come into play, so that there's an increasing need for access, for affordability, and for the things that we may have taken for granted, need to have a level playing field irrespective of the economy, your income, or your ethnicity, or your environment. You can access these therapies. So again, interconnectedness.
Absolutely. I mean, what's exciting now is we're entering the sort of age of digital health or connected health or mobile health, where almost anybody with a smartphone, from some of your outlying, areas of the Caymans to even parts of the United States, which have little access to clinicians and specialists, can now always be connected to almost an AI doctor that learns you. That when you can use your wearable device to pick up signs of early COVID or to help improve your sleep or your mental health. And so there's this real opportunity now to democratize healthcare, to bring better health equity to almost anybody. Many, half the planet still doesn't have internet access. We're seeing examples in China now where 300 million individuals now get digital and mobile and virtual care combined with human care when they're starting to use data, machine learning, and mobile devices. It's not a panacea, and we need to think about not just giving somebody a wearable or a smartphone, but the digital determinants of health. How do you communicate in the right culture, language, to the right age, to the right incentives. But whether it's stem cell therapy or a digital therapy, it's an exciting time to think differently about how we connect the dots and how we both get folks engaged with their own health information and health progress, as well as to collaborate together to improve care around the continuum.
With that collaborative approach to improving that care as you reference, are we then perhaps maybe looking at two things in particular, not just the approach as we age and the potential of ageism, but more importantly, ethics? The concerns now, for instance, with COVID, that there will be the political despots and the like who may take that information and somehow manipulate it so that we confine some people because of the, how do you put it, the particular information that we receive would be indicative of a particular potential for infection and transmission. Are we at all considering the ethics that would surround that, not just that would emanate from the research and the testing, but also the impact and implications of those for whom this smart wearable device has now conveyed to some authority that this person or this grouping need now to be even more restricted and monitored?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, right? Between sort of private COVID, or you have dementia. Who gets to own that data? Is it Fitbit or Apple or Google, or is it you? I would argue we should all own our own healthcare data and be able to opt in to when we want to share it in anonymized ways to, again, build those better kind of Google Maps for health. But we need to be careful, even in the age of COVID now. We understand the disparities of who's likely to get sick and die from COVID. We're also understanding that there's a definite benefit to being able to identify and do what's called contact tracing, and when someone is positive, to prevent others from spreading it even unknowingly. So I don't have all the answers. I think in general, technology can play a role in positive and negative ways, and I think the potential is use COVID as a catalyst to improve public health, prevention, diagnostics, therapy, clinical trials, while being mindful that there's sometimes the dark side. You can 3D print a gun, but you also could 3D print a medical device. AI can be used for good or for bad. Right. And that means we need to get the public policy folks, the ethicists, the regulators, thinking ahead. What happens when you have a $10 genome? I can sequence you and learn about your risks. What happens when I can look at your voice or even your face on a Zoom call and pick up your heart rate and your vital signs and maybe use that in interesting ways? Might be helpful if you're negotiating with somebody, but also might be helpful to screen them for a health condition.
Right. And this is where I think maybe from what you shared, the public discussion, the public comfort level and knowledge of how the technology is used and potential abuse, and as you shared, being the owners of this information, the arbiters of how it's shared, when it's shared, maybe the public now has to be more willing to engage as opposed to allowing, the, what do we call them, the powers that be. How we so quickly anonymize them. Thank you very much for sharing. But as you close your discussion, are there other comments that you may want to share? And I think this is why this conference in particular this time is that much more crucial. So other thoughts, Dr. Kraft?
One comment on closing is that, in many ways, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And many of your listeners have an opportunity to, even if your doctor isn't using these technologies or your health insurance isn't covering it, to use simple technologies. It doesn't matter what kind of tracker you might wear on your wrist. You can use those to help track your sleep and optimize your sleep, which is plays a really important role in your risk for everything from cancer to depression to obesity. You can start to be more engaged in your own health data and be, the owner of your health information, but also a conduit to finding new solutions, bringing them to the Caymans, or if you have an idea, distributing that around the world. It's a really exciting time for all players to be involved in rethinking healthcare, and not from a fear factor, but from the potential to see a challenge, like why are we still using fax machines, all the way to how might we leverage millions of patients' genomes in positive ways, or I might apply my skills in making video games to using video games for health or for training nurses or doctors. So it's a really exciting time, and I would encourage folks not to wait, but to think about, if they have a medical issue, what solutions might exist today to start to solve them and help to collaborate, and both in your own medical institutions and in your own personal lives.
Well, not just use the technology for designer babies and vanity, but use it for actually the greater good, huh?
The greater good. Yes, you can make a CRISPR baby, which is ethically challenging, but you can also use CRISPR to cure diseases. And like we're seeing with the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, which came to market very, very quickly, those are going to have huge applications to help, just like penicillin was a game changer in the 1940s, or even, putting chlorine in our drinking water or pasteurizing milk. We have lots of opportunities, even low-tech elements, to really improve our health span and then treat more significant diseases like cancers and others. So it's a very exciting time.
It is, man. I think this is a great time to be a student. This is a great time to be a policymaker. It is a great time to be alive as a voter. Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Groff.
Thank you.
All right, have a wonderful afternoon. And Nikki, to you, and I sort of invite Camilla back into the discussion. People look at Cayman, for instance, and it's a speck on the map. Well, it probably is, but small in size, but great in might if we harness the collective resource. These conferences are not at all easy to pull off, but they're impactful.
And I think this is the key thing. I think as Daniel was telling us, I think this is about demystifying, actually, and overcoming some of the hesitancy around advancing technologies. We're quite fearful of the things that we don't understand. We're naturally fearful of change. And so really bringing these global experts to share advancements in technology, tourism, the geopolitical landscape we were talking about, the economy, digital currencies, absolutely crucial to our evolution here and our understanding and our advancement.
I mean, the other thing that we can say is that, we don't know what we don't know. And I think this is where knowledge is empowering and powerful. And if we share it, if everybody is able to access, they may not all understand it at the same pace or at the same time to the same degree. But if we understand that it's accessible, it's available, it makes it almost leveling to some extent.
It does, yeah. And I think this is particularly timely as well, because since the pandemic, we've really seen an acceleration of the adoption of digital resources. And I think that's something that Daniel kind of touched upon. And so we're really able to see how these specific industries are changing due to these digital advancements. And quite often we're not very aware of what goes on in the big world. I think that's probably more true more now than ever, as we haven't been able to travel. So really bringing forums like this to Cayman so that we can understand a bit more what's going on.
Yeah, and I would just like to say that this is possible because of partnerships like the one we have with Overseas Asset Management. This conference, as you say, takes a great deal of effort and planning over the course of the year that leads up to it, particularly challenging this year. So it's want to just mention that it's hosted obviously by RF, but in partnership with Fidelity, PwC, Overseas Asset Management, Campbell's, CUC and DART, and we're incredibly grateful for their loyal and enduring support of bringing these experts and their opinions here.
Whether we're launching the catboat or the latest schooner, many hands make light work.
Absolutely.
Sponsors come on board, and I commend you for having 300 students be a part of it. I remember the 2003 conference, one of your first ones, where some students of mine, I was just sort of volunteer teaching, and they attended. And it was amazing of what they could see from their textbooks being played out in the real world.
Yeah, it's a conference for everyone. It's a really affordable price point as well. It's $150 this year, US $150. It's taking place on the 6th of May. It's online, so people can register and look at the agenda and learn more about the speakers by visiting rfeoc.com. You'll find all the information there and the registration details. And all of that information will be up for 24 hours after the event as well. So we'd encourage people to join us next Thursday and learn more about these really important subjects.
I think the more we learn, the more we realize how Cayman is so well positioned to, we have a great infrastructure in terms of, all the grids, but in particular, the internet, the resource that we have that we complain about sometimes, but we don't always appreciate how easily we take it for granted. Any closing thoughts first, perhaps Ms. Camilla, and then if you want to recap anything, Ms. Nikki?
I think also just that digital is such a big opportunity for Cayman, and we've seen that with a number of businesses that could never have operated here before that have now moved here. And so again, I just think a lot of these themes, I think one which will be really interesting is Chip Conley talking about tourism. Obviously, it's taken a bit of a battering here, and it'll be really interesting to hear his insights into how he thinks that's going to take off again once the world opens up. But again, I think it's very pertinent to our life here.
Certainly is, very, very indeed.
Yeah, and all of our speakers, we talked about the theme is digital disruption. They are all disruptors, like big picture thinkers, are encouraging us to look at through a very different lens as some of the challenges that we face this year. So as I say, it really is a conference for everyone. So we'd encourage everyone to join us and check out the agenda on rfeoc.com.
I tell you what, the idea that the disruptive behavior once was seen as something negative, and now everybody wants to be a disruptor. I wrote it down. I was going to ask, I knew about it, but I decided not to, because I could take us down another path. But we need to get to that point where we're seeing